Levi's jeans, Monopoly, American Girl doll, Converse shoes, the list could go on. These are all toys and apparel that many would call quintessential American brand things. But in fact, these items that I mentioned are actually made in Bangladesh, China, Turkey, and other countries. Oftentimes, we don't realize where the things that we have or what the things that we buy are coming from, but we should care because companies are outsourcing their manufacturing to other countries, and those other countries have unethical and unsafe working conditions. Before a few months ago, I didn't really pay attention to where my things were from, like my clothes or my car or even like furniture. Sure, I noticed things were said made in China, but I didn't really care or notice that much until one time my mom and I were in Target and she told me we should try to see how many things are made in other countries versus things that were made in America, and we quickly lost count of how many things were made in China or other countries overseas. So since that, I basically just began to research and find out more information about things made in America. And today I want to persuade you guys to begin to buy more American-made products, and in order to do so, you should have a good understanding of the history of manufacturing and why it left the United States, be aware of the unsafe working conditions overseas, and how we as a consumer are responsible for boosting the American economy and manufacturing businesses by simply buying. First, let's take a look at the history of American manufacturing. Through the 70s and onward, things were mainly made in the United States. Things like appliances, cars, clothes, a lot of things, most of the things that were in stores were made in America. What changed was us. We wanted more things for the same amount of money on the same incomes, but at a cheaper, more abundant cost and quantity. In 2001, the major decline in manufacturing began, and according to John Briggs in his book Simply American, from 2001 to 2009, 42,400 U.S. factories closed, and about 5 million manufacturing jobs have been lost since 2001. To be clear, the decline in manufacturing factories in America has other reasons beyond just companies outsourcing their factories, but they do have a pretty tight relationship, but there's a lot more that can go into a factory closing than just that. So now that we know the history of manufacturing, I want to explain why unsafe working conditions overseas contribute to a stronger desire to buy made in America items. The typical overseas manufacturing environment is unsafe for workers. This should matter to us because we're purchasing products that are made from these factories and therefore by default supporting those factories and what happens there. And this, we should be aware of this, because if we're supporting something we don't even know about, that is a dangerous place to be in as an American consumer. A garment factory with unsafe working conditions is the definition of a sweatshop, and according to the Journal of International Trade, Law, and Policy, in Bangladesh, these are small enclosed spaces with little air, and the safety conditions are incredibly poor. Workers are required to be there for long hours of a day with no breaks in small and cramped locations. Another thing to consider is that 80% of factory workers overseas are typically female, and that means that they are subject to more harassment, abuse, and torture. And on top of all of these things, the workers are getting paid an incredibly small amount. In July of 2010, the monthly minimum wage in Bangladesh was 3,000 taka, or about 35 US dollars. That's according to the Journal of International Trade, Law, and Policy again. According to a report done by the American Journal of International Law, 2 accidents occurred in Bangladesh that opened the public eye to the unsafe working conditions overseas. In 2012, there was a fire in the Tazreen fashions industry that killed 112 people. And then in 2013, the Rana Plaza factory collapsed and it killed over 1,100 people. These events might be extreme, but they open the public eye to what is happening in countries that create garments for America. To establish relevance or importance, the United States imports about $4.5 billion in garment imports from Bangladesh every year. It's important to know that these accidents are happening so that we can understand how lives are being put in danger. Next, I want to explain how we can support our own economy by, instead of supporting these unsafe working conditions. When we choose to buy American, we are creating jobs for American workers and therefore bringing jobs back to, or bringing factories back to the U.S. So it's just like a positive cycle, essentially. Slowly, companies are beginning to bring their factories back to the United States. In the last year alone, over 327,000 new manufacturing jobs have been created according to MarketWatch.com. And many details can go into a factory opening, but essentially an increase in jobs is going to equal an increase in the consumer demand for U.S. made, which is going to go back to make more jobs. So it's another cycle of sorts. And I have a graph that I will reference in my PowerPoint here. More jobs equals a lower unemployment rate. And the unemployment rate is actually sitting at 3.7% right now, and it's been that way for the past several months, which is incredibly low, about the lowest it's been in 10 years. And that's according to the National Conference of State Legislatures. In October of 2018, about 250,000 new jobs were created, and a portion of those were actually manufacturing jobs. It says that on the National Conference of State Legislature website, which is really interesting. This data shows that in the U.S., manufacturing jobs are increasing, and that is improving our economy because it's keeping the unemployment rate low. So to conclude, we as consumers are responsible, and we need to take action in supporting our own economy by buying products that are made in the United States. Before we take action, it's important to understand why manufacturing left the United States in the first place, and to become more aware of the unsafe practices that are occurring in factories overseas so that we can become more responsible consumers. So next time you're in a store or you're looking through your closet, I encourage you to take a look at where things are made, and you might be surprised at what you find. Or hopefully after today, you're not so surprised at how many things come from overseas in places like China, Bangladesh, or Turkey. So are all imported goods unethical? No, many companies actually do work with their overseas manufacturers to create a healthy workplace for their employees. Another question is, will I ever stop purchasing imported goods? Probably not, but after educating myself on U.S. made goods versus imported goods, I have definitely been persuaded as a consumer to try to buy American made goods, and I hope you have too.